Thank you everyone for coming out today. On behalf of ANI Solutions and Secure Identity Solutions, I welcome you guys to the presentation on SiteMinder OIDC for Cloud Apps. My name is Chris Taylor. I'm one of the principals at Secure Identity Solutions. And on that note, let's get started. One housekeeping item. We're going to talk about the agenda here. First of all, we're going to do an overview of ANI and SIS. We're going to discuss what is OIDC, why cloud apps, SSO to cloud apps, and a short demonstration. All right, let's get started. ANI, founded in 1999 in Atlanta, Georgia, been a partner with CA since 2003, and became a Tier 1 partner with Broadcom in 2018. 22 years in business, 300 plus service engagements since the acquisition of CA by Broadcom, and over 500 happy customers. As you can see here, long list of focus areas and expertise they offer their broad client base. So Secure Identity Solutions is a boutique consulting firm that specializes in identity and access management offerings. Founded in 2006, Broadcom Tier 2 partner. We are partnered with various IAM brands. We offer various solutions such as IAM solution assessments, which are kind of extensive health checks for implemented solutions. We provide a hosted solution called IAM Infrastructure as a Service. And we provide a managed service in the form of IAM Management as a Service, where we provide basically the same type of management functionality, but for an on-prem infrastructure. All right. We do IAM projects as well as we provide bundled services called premium support. What is OIDC? We can't properly describe OpenID Connect without discussing its origins. In reality, OIDC is a set of features taken from OAuth and OpenID. OIDC is a simple identity layer on top of an OAuth 2.0 protocol. It allows clients to verify the identity of the end user based on authentication performed by an authorization server, as well as obtain basic profile information about the user. It is an open standard which provides decentralized authentication protocol for OIDC that allows clients of all types, including web-based, mobile, JavaScript, to request information about authenticated sessions of end users. The specification suite is extensible, allowing participants to use optional features such as encryption of identity data, discovery of OpenID providers, and log out when it makes sense for them. Where OpenID provides an authentication mechanism, OAuth portion of IDC is an open standard for access delegation. OAuth is short for Open Authorization. This allows users to give a relying party access to their identity data, which is stored or managed on another website or web service without providing a password or security credential. Sites such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, and Microsoft all allow for users to delegate their personal information from one service to another, all without sharing the user's password. A big benefit of leveraging OIDC is that it is client agnostic. It works with web, it works with mobile, it works with JavaScript, or as we discussed earlier, single page applications without any loss of functionality. So what are some of the features of OpenID Connect? Provider discovery, a mechanism where relying parties or a client can discover which providers can issue tokens with the claims required. So the discovery mechanism allows for resource provider or the applications that are relying on this information to go out and find parties that'll work with them. Right? Additionally, there are things like dynamic registration, which allows clients to dynamically register, in this case, with an authorization provider to immediately give access. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later, that there's not much of a relationship required, needed to get a partnership or an arrangement to start federating with an OIDC provider. Right? So obviously it provides federation as such as it provides you the ability to single sign-on across platforms. And where we see this most is things like social media, where it's very loose relationships that require very little security, but provide great benefits in seamless transition from one site to another, knowing who you are, those sorts of things. The protocol or standard is also very API friendly, which has extensive benefits. We wanted to provide a little bit of context for the remaining slides. So we're presenting here an OIDC flow. It's not the only flow, just a sample flow. The user, in this case, will browse to an application or website. The RP, in this case, is the relying party, sends a request and redirects the user to SSO. And that's going to be the authorization provider. Okay? The user is prompted to authenticate with its credentials. The provider validates the user's credentials, sends the assertion, or another set name for that is claims, to the relying party to confirm authentication, and the user is granted access to the desired application. This is a simplification of what happens, but generally will hold true for our remaining discussion. So, what's a real world example of OIDC partnership? Let's say, for example, you're on your favorite news site, you want to share this great article with your Twitterverse. And in this scenario, you're not logged in on Twitter. So to share or to tweet, you need to log in, right? So you click on login, but you don't log into Twitter much because it's typically on your phone. You're sitting at your desktop. So, well, I don't want to log in, or I can't remember my password. Let me just click on, authenticate with the provider. And you select Google because you know that Gmail password, right? Now, if you haven't done this interaction before, you haven't authenticated with Google against Twitter, you're going to get a consent from Google saying, hey, you authorize Twitter to have access to this information that's part of your profile, and typically there's a time limit to it, meaning that there's a 6-month, 18-month, whatever it may be, that kind of grants them access. They don't have access in forever. They just have access for the time period that's been established. Right? So, and once that consent is granted, a set of information, which is called claims, set of claims, right? Each attribute is considered an individual claim. Set of claims is sent over to Twitter. And what Twitter does is it takes that claim because it was part of the original request, and it says, hey, I know who you are. I'm going to match you up, and I'm going to grant you access. Then you get to the Twitter main page. You get to your tweet button with the link to the article that you wanted to post and share with your Twitter followers, right? So what's happened? You've granted access to a set of information that was stored on one website, to another website for the purposes of authentication without actually authenticating at that requesting site. In this case, it's Twitter. And that set of information is sent over in what's called a set of claims, which is dictated by what we call a scope. And there is a default scope of OpenID, which is a requirement to be implemented by all the authorization providers, but there are others as well, such as profile, which has several elements, email, like it says, it actually only has email that can be exchanged. But you've done this without logging in directly to Twitter. So you've single signed on using Google against Twitter, all from clicking on an unaffiliated website, right? So for all intents and purposes, OIDC is a single sign-on implementation, right? It allows for a user to authenticate at one website or service and gain access to a resource on another, right? What other mechanisms out there that directly compete with this is going to be SAML, the standard federation. You know, the standard for federation is pretty much SAML in the enterprise world, and we'll talk about consumer versus enterprise a little bit later. But SAML is the primary mechanism for non-commercial use, right? When I say non-commercial, I mean consumers. It's the B2B kind of, reigning champ there, right? OIDC is, what's the benefit of OIDC then? If I have SAML out in the market, well, OIDC is simple. It's easier to do, easier to maintain. It doesn't require a lot of complexity. It doesn't require, it's very small format. It works on a lot of different platforms. It works in services. It works in mobile, and it doesn't require a lot of additional pieces, right? The coding is simple compared to building code that has to meet the SAML specs. So that's kind of where it is. It's an easier implementation, generally thought to be, right? And if you're experienced with SAML and you say, well, hey, SAML's easy for me. But the reality is SAML's not easy for a lot of people out there, right? Now, what do you get for OIDC being easier versus, SAML, right? SAML is infinitely flexible because OIDC has a set of scopes that are predefined that have certain things that can be requested. Well, in a SAML world, anything can be returned in response to an authentication request in the assertion. So if you use a scope such as profile in OIDC, which may have 5 or 6 elements, an assertion can have infinite number of elements. And you have the ability to digitally sign each of those elements and encrypt those elements as a whole or individually, and it's up to you, right? It's up to what that partnership requires, right? So OIDC uses claims to transmit user information as a response to a scope. SAML uses an assertion, okay? What is an assertion? So an assertion is essentially XML, is an extension. It's an extension of the XML standard, primarily built for authentication, right? And it works with browsers and various types of technologies, including web pages and web apps and your favorite video services. For a long time, we're using SAML before OIDC came along. And it provides a robust infrastructure, meaning authentication infrastructure in exchange of information for user information, right? Claims are based on JSON, right? So a JSON response, very simple. The claim is there's only going to be a certain number of claims that are available in the market. Means not available in the market, that are available in the standard, and the scope that are available include claims, right? So claims are attributes. So first name, last name, email address, address. Now, depending on the scope that the relying party or the client kind of requested, that'll determine what's in the response. So that'll determine how many of those claim elements will be in the response back to the user, right? And that's going to come in the form of JSON. So the big difference between these two are SAML is or requires a level of interaction or a level of partnership that each party must know about the other. They must know what they're going to exchange. They must know how they're going to interact. OIDC doesn't require that. Because we talked about OIDC having a provider discovery mechanism, which will allow a client to go out and discover who can it interact with that will give it the information that it wants for its user community and return the profile type of data, not profile, excuse me, scope data that includes the claims for this, right? And that's a loosely connected federation. Now, it means that there are a lot of providers and relying parties who really don't interact, meaning from a person-to-person level to understand how the data is being used or anything like that, which is going to be different in the SAML world, where there's going to be discussions about attributes. There's going to be discussion about data retention. There's going to be discussions about, because it's not going to just be basic information in a SAML world. There's going to be more, right? It's going to be a more enriched information exchange. So those processes and procedures are necessary, right? So then we get to what's consumer versus enterprise, right? So OIDC is going to be consumer focused. It's going to be your social media. It's going to be your news sites. It's going to be Gmail. It's going to be Office 365. It's going to be your custom built apps. All of those things where I'm not exchanging financial information. I'm not exchanging HIPAA information. I'm not exchanging PII or PHI in most cases, because it's not for that purpose. It's mainly just to provide a framework of the identity, and if I need more, there has to be another mechanism to pull it, right? So SAML is not solely focused, but its primarily role is to serve the enterprise. So B2B, right? B to E, right? B to partners, whatever that B2 is, except for kind of B2C, but that's what its role is, right? Whereas OIDC is going to be consumer focused. It's going to be that B2C, because one, as an organization, I may have a lot more consumers or customers, but I'm offloading that responsibility of managing that credential back out to that authorization provider. I don't have to manage it. My support people don't have to take calls on it. I don't have to worry about password resets, all those things, because that is now the authorization provider's responsibility. Now, we talk about Google. We talk about going back to what Google had, right? In the scenario of Twitter, Google does that every day for email. So to authenticate someone for Twitter is not changing their model, because they are already authenticating the user, and now that user uses that credential to get access, right? So That is where now Twitter really doesn't have to worry about if they chose to offload it completely, they don't have to worry about that. Right? So for all intensive purposes, OIDC is a So now let's talk about apps. More specifically, let's start with cloud apps. So when we say cloud app, it means different things to different people. Cloud apps are or can be hosted internally hosted, externally hosted, in a public cloud, a private cloud. It can be anywhere, right? Cloud apps can be anywhere. Um, and now cloud apps are not necessarily purely cloud apps. And because there are scenarios where cloud apps are now what we call hybrid apps, meaning that there are portions of the apps that live on-prem and there are portions that live in the public or private cloud. Right? So what are the three big classifications of apps? There's going to be SaaS, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. We all know software as a service, right? Software service is going to be Salesforce, right? Platform as service is going to be Azure. Um, infrastructure as a service could be Azure, or most likely you're going to say AWS, right? So let's start with software as a service. This group is probably the one you know most or you think of as the most mature, as I mentioned earlier, Salesforce and its DevForce platform. We're kind of the market leaders for a very long time. Not quite sure if they are today, but they were kind of the innovator in that force, basically giving you a platform to kind of bring your business to them from a Salesforce perspective. CRM was their big offering. They kind of transitioned that into the platform as a service, which is the DevForce stuff. But it was a mechanism to basically give you a platform that was big and bulky as a service, so you didn't have to bring it in-house, right? And they charge you a fee. You can reach it via your browser, and they give you all these great things, right? Offload that management, right? So the next category is platform as a service, where Salesforce was kind of the pioneer on the software as a service, and their development platform, right, called DevForce, was the pioneer in this area. Right? So what is platform as a service? Well, it's a cloud-based service for creating and managing applications. The provider handles all the hardware, software, gives you GUI access, right? So if you know who they are, right? It's going to be Google App Engine, Microsoft Azure, and AWS, in addition to Salesforce, right? Those are the big guys in that space. Those are the guys that you see every day doing those types of things, right? Providing this platform as a service, which really kind of extracts the applications from on-prem hosting and all the pieces that make it out that are involved with it, that kind of give you what you would think of as a cloud-based app. Right? So our last category is infrastructure as a service, right? IaaS, right? You know, we all know in this space the dominant provider in this space is going to be Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, right? This Azure being the largest, AWS's largest competitor, but AWS is the market leader, right? And this is cloud-based hosted computing infrastructure, right? So I need a server, but I don't want to bring in a server. you're essentially leasing virtual machines. So obviously the space of VMware being kind of the largest cloud provider for private hosted on-prem, AWS and Azure kind of do the same thing for the public and private cloud players such as Microsoft and Azure, right? So that's where, infrastructure as a service, because I don't have to deal with the networking. I don't have to deal with the databases. I don't have to deal with the servers. I don't have to deal with redundancy. I don't have to deal with multiple data centers. So IaaS is essentially a on-demand data center or multiple data centers. I can have them in the United States, I can have them in Mexico, I can have them worldwide, and I can do it in minutes, right? That's the beauty of that technology. So why did we talk about SaaS and PaaS and infrastructure as a service, right? When we're supposed to be talking about OIDC. Well, when we discuss SiteMinder support for OIDC, we want to talk about SiteMinder can support OIDC any of these models. Wherever these applications live, SiteMinder can support it with OIDC. So we already know that SiteMinder can support it in this traditional authentication authorization sense, and we also know that it can support it in a SAML, but now it can also support OIDC, right? So SiteMinder goes where the apps are, and in the case of clouds technology, it doesn't have to be deployed in the cloud to secure the cloud, right? So how do we get to access control for cloud apps, right? So we're going to once again, we're going to kind of return to our implicit flow model. We don't care what platform it's on or anything of that nature, or what type of cloud app you have or cloud implementation you have. We're going to just generically talk about it, right? So you're going to have to take a talk about your flow, right? So there are types of flows. And with types of flows, you have what's also called response types, right? And with that, you have response modes, right? So we're not gonna talk about code flow versus token ID versus token versus that combination today. So we're just gonna keep it high level. You're gonna select your flow, right? And then on the app side, you're gonna say, well, how are clients gonna register? And when I talk about clients, I'm really talking about, am I going to publish my service, provider service, or am I going to allow clients to, uh, work with me to kind of establish that relationship? And depending on what you're trying to accomplish, it makes, different. It makes sense doing it one way or another, right? Now, if I'm the client, I have another decision to make. Well, how do I identify providers, right? I need providers that will be able to give me the claims that I need to validate users. Well, how do I know that? Well, I know that because I know if I have a discovery service and I leverage what's called WellKnowns, I can read the metadata associated with that provider via the either doing the registration process of a client or doing the discovery process via provider. I can now determine if that provider can support what I want to do, right? So then you're going to select the claims model that you want, right? And the claims model are going to be really not necessarily a model, but you're going to select the scope that includes the claim elements, right? And this is going to be this is the decision that has to be made on both sides, right? So a authorization provider is going to determine what claims it's going to provide, and then thus it knows what scopes it can respond to, right? Which will then go into what it needs to provide during the discovery process in its metadata, right? Now, the application, all right, or relying party also needs to understand what information, right? So if it says, hey, I need these 5 elements, and authorization provider A only provides 4 of those 5, you either have to change your model to adjust it to the scope that is acceptable, or you have to then go to go find another provider that provides you the scope that provides the claims in the response, right? So for this demonstration, we're going to be looking at single sign-on between a Microsoft-based portal, which is built on the Power Apps platform, and an on-prem SiteMinder OIDC authorization provider. So in this case, we'll be authenticating with local credentials to a cloud app with SiteMinder sitting on-prem. So we arrive at our very generic site. You can see that we have a sign-in option. We're going to select that. For this demonstration, we've removed the local sign-in option. So right now, we just have the 2 external providers. The Azure AD one, which is out of the box in this scenario, which can be turned off, but we left it there. And the authorization provider that it represents our SiteMinder implementation that's on-prem. So we click on the button, we get redirected directly back to our login page. Click login. All right. So now we can see instead of having sign in, it has my name and has a profile button. So we click on profile, and we're able to see first name, last name, and email. Those happen to be attributes that are sent over via the claim of OpenID. All right, so that's why those are presented. They didn't have to figure those things out, that sort of thing. So now we're going to look at the SiteMinder portion of the configuration. Federation, OpenID. The first thing you have to set up in this model is going to be the authorization provider. And obviously, install SiteMinder directories and all those pieces. Session store is a requirement as well as the CA access gateway. But strictly speaking about the configuration for OIDC and just getting that up and running, the authorization provider is the first thing you have to set up. So we're going to look at that SIS Enterprise Provider. All right. You can see here that we have our user directory, SS Cloud Users Internal, which happens to be an LDAP directory. We're using that, although we're not doing ID token authentication with this. We have that directory enabled for ID token as well as authentication or authorization. So base URL, as you can see, SSL enabled, which is a requirement for OIDC. We have our authentication URL, and if any of you are familiar with the SAML configurations of SiteMinder, this is something that you see regularly, and this is without no exception is basically the same thing. All right. We have our signing alias. It's just a self-signed cert. We're going to be signing the access token, user ID, user information, and sign-in ID token as well. For this demonstration, we're not encrypting anything, but you can encrypt. All right. So these are the basic out-of-the-box claims that are available, that are present in just the authorization provider. And what we've done is actually go in and update the ones that we knew we were going to need. For example, the sub is UID, the name is CN versus I think it was full name underscore name or something of that sort, were the generic names, and we just changed them to the LDAP names here. So family name is SN and not family underscore name, male, given name, etc. Right? Then, so that's about it. So the next piece of this, and it's probably the most important part, this is where the relationship occurs between these apps and SiteMinder as the authorization provider, is the clients. So we have our client name, which is essentially the name of our app, client ID. We have a secret we're not showing right there. In this case, and most users are going to have a user consent form, and this is going to be something where users can decide what they can consent to the use of the token, the credentials that are being provided by the provider and being sent to the application. And they can opt in or they opt out. If they opt out, obviously authentication stops. Opting in allows them to approve it, and you can continue on. And for this demo, we did not enable user consent. So we've chosen the application type is public. Now, we did not enable the PKCE option because the portal application built on Power Apps does not support it at this time. Now, other applications and custom applications on the Azure side do support it, but it's not something that is supported by the Power App that we chose for our demonstration. All right. We've selected our authorization provider, which is the only one we have defined in this case. And the scope that the Power App application is going to send is going to be an OpenID scope, although we enabled email and profile as well. Not something that we're going to be leveraging right away. All right. The code response we chose the response type is code. We enabled ID token, and ID token as separate ones as well. Okay. All right. This is going to be the app that we're returning to. We have another application up there, so that's why this URL is here. So it can support multiple applications with the same provider, with the same client. In this case, we were playing around with different apps and just wanted to make sure that configuration was valid. So you would set up any timing and timeouts with tokens and refresh times as well, because one thing is session store is required for this implementation. So these come in play of how often the session store is updated, the tokens are refreshed, and the time to live. And in this scenario, we're not doing single logout from the resource provider, meaning the application side, back to the authorization provider. So the timeouts are more significant versus if we were doing logouts. As soon as I'm logged out there, they could log out locally. They would be logged out locally, and then the session would be killed. In a lot of OIDC scenarios, you probably wouldn't enable single logout if your SiteMinder implementation is on-prem, because that would essentially kill the person's session on-prem and they maybe have to re-authenticate to get access to other things, right? And this is going to be significant, especially if Active Directory is in play, right, as your primary user directory within SiteMinder to gain access to on-prem applications. Okay, so the list of endpoints that are now available, and depending on what happens, right, or what's the application's requirement, it's going to may use, obviously, it's going to use at least one of these, but most likely more, at least two of these, being the primary issuer URL and authorize, and depending on scenarios, it will probably also use the provider meta directory endpoint URL, which has the WellKnowns. And so and we'll look at this in a second when we look at the configuration for the demonstration from the web browser we were recording that session. We'll see that where it's going in this case, right? So that's that. So the other last thing, just to kind of round out, all the things that are completed, but most people probably already know, is we have our application, our protected domain, and this is just to do authentication, right? So if I look at the resource per filter, right, we're going to have our SiteMinder agent redirect JSP / redirect JSP is the effective resource, right? So that's where we're protecting. And we have an allow rule and an on easy accept rule, which is not necessarily a scenario, but wanted to just kind of demonstrate that if you needed to do also generate a response or something of that nature, you can still leverage the same tricks of the trade, especially if you're going to be enriching, you're going to be grabbing things from a session store to use in a claim, or if you're going to be doing some additional steps, or your application requires some additional information that may not be transmitted in a claim. You may have to do that in a different way, do different integration. You can still leverage the kind of the out-of-the-box tips and tricks that are available with SiteMinder. So I'm going to close that. So now we're going to look at the configuration associated with the app within Azure. So you can tell we're in Power Apps platform here, and we're just going to look at the settings first. And we're going to choose authentication settings so we can see all of those. It's going to bring up a list of providers. As you can see, local sign-in is disabled, and so we're going to go down here to SIS Enterprise Provider, and here you get to see, okay, the URLs, the information that we were referencing in the WAM UI. So the authority, which is that first URL in that endpoint list, right, is the OIDC SIS Azure portal URL, right? The client ID comes from the client. This is actually comes from the this application, so it's not something that we pull from SiteMinder, but it's something that comes from the Azure side. The meta address, which is actually that well-known address. Basically, this is the go out, get the config from the OIDC provider, and have it tell me all the things that it's capable of doing, right? So we've selected the OpenID scope is generic, and the response type is code, right? As you can see, these are the options: code, ID token, ID token, ID token, token, and code, ID token, token. So whatever type I select here should match the type on the other side, right? Here is the secret that was available on the client side as well, right? So because we chose code, the only response mode is query. Now, if we chose ID token, now we get form post, right? But for our scenario, query is the only one that we care about, all right? So plain and simple. We don't have any, this is the extent of the configuration for the Azure app, all right? So now let's look at the request process, right? So you can see that we start at the Power App site, right? And this other set of resources is primarily the page loading, any other attributes that have to be, or display items that have to be prepared. And then we click on, we have. So what are the benefits of OIDC? Right? The number one benefit is OIDC is client agnostic. OIDC allows for loosely connected relationships. OIDC allows for the user to revoke access to their information at any time. Right? OIDC supports platform as a service, software as a service. So different cloud application types, and even infrastructure as a service is supported by OIDC. Right? It provides access control for SSO, cloud applications, right? And the key thing that obviously we demonstrated here is an on-prem SiteMinder implementation supporting cloud-based SSO where SiteMinder is not present, right? So a on-prem SiteMinder implementation protecting a cloud application, right? So you can leverage your authentication and authorization mechanism on-prem to protect cloud apps. Identity is core, identity is central, identity is important, and should be tightly controlled. SiteMinder gives you the tools, the platform to be able to do that. So that's essentially what we have. So we had a couple questions that pop up. First one, what are the prerequisites for configuring SiteMinder as an OIDC provider? So there are two requirements. The CA access gateway must be installed and deployed, and SSL must be enabled for the gateway. Okay. Question number two, what other OID support does SiteMinder provide? So in addition to being the authorization provider, which we discussed, we demonstrated the authorization code. But in addition to that, it does the JWT bearer token grant and implicit flow. And as a resource provider or server, some people call it, you get the JWT authentication support is there as well. So next question, what version of SiteMinder is needed for OIDC? So the base 12.8 version provides the resource server support or resource provider support. If you need the OIDC provider support, in addition to the AWS Cognito service, and you also want the REST API management for OIDC, you need to go to 12.8.03. All right. If there is a requirement for the use of the SiteMinders and OAuth client communication with public OIDC Connect providers through a firewall or /proxy, then you need to go to 12.8.06. Okay. So the base is 12.8, but if you want some of the more obviously other features, you need to go to higher levels, being 12.803 or 12.806. The demo that we showed today was 12.807, which is kind of the latest and greatest, and has some additional advanced features, but are not necessarily part of the standard, but make the use of integrating SiteMinder with OIDC in your environment a little bit easier. Well, that's the conclusion of our presentation today. On behalf of Secure Identity Solutions and I would like to thank you guys for attending. If you have any additional questions, we have our email addresses here on the screen, as well as our websites, and we are greatly appreciative of the time you took today to join us. Thank you.